For more on this, let's bring in Adam Weinstein, who served as a Marine in Afghanistan and is now a research fellow at the Quincy Institute with a focus on Afghanistan. Thanks for joining us, Adam. First, I'd like to get your reaction to what President Biden had to say.
Thanks for having me. I think President Biden was very honest about the limits of the U.S. military to shape conditions in Afghanistan. And unfortunately, in Washington, D.C. and the debate about Afghanistan, it's become sort of a faux pas to be direct or to acknowledge the limitations of the U.S. military. But I think he was very blunt in doing that.
Interesting. Was Biden right to pull out like this?
Well, I think, we can find things that are wrong with the execution of the withdrawal, but the decision was absolutely correct. And the disorder and chaos that we see happening during the withdrawal is a consequence of the intervention to begin with. When we intervened in Afghanistan and began a nation-building exercise, in some sense, we created a suspended sentence that we would one day have to serve, which is that there would be a withdrawal and it would have consequences. When you enter a country as an outside power, you disrupt the power dynamics, and when you leave, you disrupt the power dynamics. But what's clear is that the only alternative was to stay indefinitely.
Yeah, former U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell once says, you break it, you fix it, you own it. You served as a Marine in Afghanistan. Is this the way you thought the U.S. mission would end?
Well, when I served as a U.S. Marine, I'm not sure I had any sense of how it would end, but I could see the dysfunction on the ground at the granular level. And when I look back and I have the hindsight is 20/20, as they say, it's pretty clear that it was going to end this way because the Afghan security forces were a paper tiger. Look, let's not forget that the Taliban did not win this militarily. They won this politically. They won this by using local power brokers to convince the ANDSF, or the Afghan security forces, to surrender en masse in province after province without firing much of a shot.
Intelligence services, experts, President Biden, none of them saw this Taliban victory coming, and certainly not this quickly. How could everyone get this so wrong?
Well, people have been getting things wrong about Afghanistan for the last 20 years. I think President Biden was honest when he said that this was in their contingency planning. But I think even the most cynical accounts of the strength of the Afghan government, unfortunately, still weren't realistic. It had an even greater legitimacy problem than we had originally thought.
You seem to be very understanding of the position that the U.S. president was in and is in. But when you see the scenes at the airport, is it clearly to you another Saigon moment for the U.S.?
Well, the optics of it are certainly a Saigon moment, but this is the consequence of these costly interventions. And I think the scenes at the airport are heartbreaking. I really implored the Biden administration in my public advocacy and writing to evacuate people much sooner. I'm not sure why the administration waited to do that. However, we have to remember that there have been incredibly high civilian casualties throughout the country over the last 20 years, even with the presence of U.S. troops. And now the world briefly is paying attention to Afghanistan, where it has ignored it for most of the last 20 years, but it has been continuous human misery. And this is just one more episode in a series of episodes where Afghan civilians have suffered.
You know, we're all so full of questions, so I'm just going to keep firing them at you, somebody who has more military background than I do. The U.S. trained the Afghan army, hundreds of thousands of soldiers to the tune of more than $80 billion. How could they be defeated so quickly by the Taliban?
Well, they were taking high casualties because we created them in our own image, and we would set up, these static outposts, and the Taliban were mobile, and we didn't enable the Afghan military to function without our logistics and our close air support. But I take it back to a point that I made earlier, which is we have to remember at the end of the day, this was not a military victory by the Taliban. It was a political victory. They used local power brokers and convinced the ANDSF to surrender.
The U.S. mission to Afghanistan, as you're well aware, was to rid the country of al-Qaeda by removing the Taliban from power. Now the Taliban are back in power. So simply put, was the mission a failure?
Well, the mission that it became was a failure. I mean, the initial mission was to disrupt al-Qaeda. I think we did significantly degrade al-Qaeda. We haven't defeated al-Qaeda, but it's the job of the president to put threats and look at all of them and put them in a priority list. And we have to remember, we live in a country in the United States that just suffered 600,000 COVID deaths. Does it make sense to stay in Afghanistan indefinitely because there's somewhat of a terrorism risk? So I'd say that the mission was a failure because we expanded it through mission creep to the point where it was unrecognizable, and it became a nation-building mission. So we failed at that, yes.
That is Adam Weinstein, research fellow at the Quincy Institute. Really appreciate your time and your perspective, Adam.
Thanks for having me.